So I was thinking about what might be reasonable in that sense. And I thought that it might be reasonable to think that what parents do does matter, in a way. But we have to take into account the social context and the institutions that are around families and parents and children and what they do together. So the first thing is that parenting practices are constrained in a way. They are constrained by cultures, by institutions. And parenting practices do not exist in a vacuum, so they interact with what happens at school, with what happens with friends, in the neighborhoods, with organizations around children and youth, so leisure and so on and so forth. But all taking this into account, I would propose that to some extent parenting practices do matter for what happens. And that parenting practices can change, as well as institutions can change. However, I think it is reasonable to think about the influence of parenting practices and their possibility and the possibility that they change only if we take that institutional context into account. That's my the general idea. So I thought, why not think about a very small something that happens in the life of children and parents and everybody's life, actually. Why a very small something? Because it is, of course, it is very difficult to, you might have a paper which says, and there are many attempts in that respect, which says what you do matters for your well-being, but well-being is a very complicated thing. It's very complex, and what you do is a lot of things together and so on. So I thought, let's take something very, very small. Sleep. How many hours somebody sleeps? What time they go to sleep? What time do they get up? And how do they sleep well? In the sense, do they get enough sleep with respect to what they need? And so on. In order to analyze the institutional dimension of parenting and children's well-being. So, to conclude on this part, some cultures, so to say, and institutions seem to support sleep-related practices which entail indirectly more or less well-being for the children in a given context. I mean, if there was no school, that would be no problem. If there was no work, that would be no problem. But work exists and school exists, so what do we do with that? So, with these thoughts in mind, I have to check on my time because I'm... it's okay. With these thoughts in my mind, I started to think about the Italian case. So I think Italy is interesting in terms of the parenting turn, especially because there is no such one yet. Or at least, as I will show, there are some attempts to go in that direction, but it's very weak, very fragmented, not at all mainstream, not totally agreed upon. There's no resources for that. So it's a country which represents laggard in a way. We know that we are laggards, so there is some policy talks about that, but we cannot say that the parenting term has come. So I think it's interesting because it shows what can happen, and this specific case might be interesting to enlarge and compare and so on, but what might happen when policies are not pushing towards parental skills, competences, and whatever. Not in a diffuse and generalized way, in a way. And it's also interesting because it then poses the question, who is then, as you were saying, Claude, this morning, who is then phrasing the problem? Is there a problem or not? And who is phrasing it? So I think it's interesting in those two senses. There is a lot of discussion also in Italy about the fact that Italian children do sleep less than many other children around Europe. There is this nice article I read about children in Southern and Eastern Europe sleeping less than children in Central and Northern Europe, and there is a difference in the average of number of hours of sleep of 2 hours. I mean, it's a lot. And there is also a claim, this is in the literature, that Italian children, and I would say by extension Southern European children, sleep less because they're culturally or traditionally more involved in the social activities of their parents. So this idea of the Italian family having dinner till late and the children, you know, playing around and they're all happy together and so on. But
only one child.
Only one child. Yeah, if you have one, so what's the problem? So the question is, why is that? How is that? How is that possible? How does that work? Is this really traditional or cultural, so to say? Which are the social institutions involved, and how do parents in Italy experience practices related to sleep? Is it okay? And are there tensions, and which tensions? There is a lot of discussion among the parents in reaction to articles, basically, about what is really right. So experts say that children need to sleep, but what is the right time? The right, not what right they say, but what is the right for me? There is a lot of doubting, about a lot of asking others about their experiences, how you do it, a lot of comparing, and a lot of looking at other cultures, to an extent as an example, and to an extent as a way to something to get away from. And there is a lot of jugglings with this rights and wrongs. So there is a doubtful attitude overall. I will skip this. It's very interesting, but it's about the Germans. How do the Germans do it? But they are. So how do the Germans do it?
Commenting on Germans.
Yes.
Okay.
How do the Germans do it? Because some of them live in Germany, or they have lived in Germany they go to sleep so early. But how do they do it? And so they have discussions about that, and some of them say, yeah, but they are German, so we are not. Okay. But besides that, what comes out is that sleep is a problem for many of these parents. Their children's sleep. It creates a lot of distress, so there's children represented, children who do not want to go to sleep, do not want to go to sleep alone, and who want to set their own sleeping time.